Greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. Anth. Why do we know so much about chimpanzees, gorillas, and orangutans? It's primarily thanks to three remarkable women, the Primate Triumvirate, the Trimates. Louis Leakey is the founder of the Kenyan paleoanthropological dynasty of three generations of anthropological researchers. Lewis decided in the mid-20th century that extended research needed to be undertaken on wild populations of chimpanzees in order to provide a baseline of behavior that would probably be similar to that of our ancestors from around 5 million years ago. Further, he decided that the researcher should be a young woman. A young woman would be less likely to create a dominance issue with the male chimpanzees. Also, a woman would have more patience and would be willing to take the time necessary to acclimate the chimpanzees to her presence. In 1957, he took on a new secretary in Kenya. Jane Goodall had traveled to Kenya to be with animals. When Goodall met with Leakey, it was to discuss animals. He immediately thought that she might be the one to do the research with chimpanzees, but he wanted to find out more about her. Goodall worked as Leakey's secretary for several months. In 1958, Leakey sent Goodall to London to learn more about primate behavior and anatomy. He also set about finding funding for the research project, which he managed to obtain in 1959. In 1960, Goodall and her mother traveled to Gombe in what is now Tanzania to study wild chimpanzees. This was the beginning of the longest running research project on wild primates. Over the decades, the Gombe research program expanded to include other researchers. Jane Goodall began traveling the world, raising awareness and funding for conservation and continued research. I was fortunate to hear Dr. Goodall give talks twice. She is an impressive and delightful speaker. Dr. Goodall continues to travel and give talks even though she is now 88 years old. Prior to Dr. Goodall's research, the definition of human was the only toolmaker. However, not long into her research at Gombe, Dr. Goodall saw chimpanzees modify sticks that they then used to probe for termites. Termite fishing is an iconic behavior for Gombe chimps, providing an important source of protein, particularly for females and their offspring. Dr. Goodall also saw that young chimps carefully studied their mothers to learn the proper techniques for modifying the stick and for fishing for the termites. It took several years for the fields of primatology and paleoanthropology to accept her observations and conclusions that chimpanzees were also toolmakers and that termite fishing is learned behavior. Paleoanthropologists were forced to create a new definition for distinguishing a human from another great ape. The new definition became: a human ancestor is an individual whose skeleton is modified to walk on two legs. Since that momentous beginning in 1960, vastly more has been learned about our closest primate relatives, the chimpanzees. With the success of Jane Goodall and the research on chimpanzees, Leakey next looked for a woman who was able to devote her life to the study of gorillas. In 1963, Diane Fossey traveled to East Africa to see the animals. She happened to visit Olduvai Gorge when the Leakeys were there working at the site. Fossey fell and injured herself, thus making her visit memorable to Louis Leakey. While in the United States in 1966 giving speeches to raise money, Leakey happened to give a speech in the city where Fossey was living. After the speech, he asked to speak to Fossey. Leakey told Fossey that he thought she would be the perfect person to study gorillas. She eagerly agreed. It was decided she would study the mountain gorillas, taking up where George Schaller, who had spent a few months there studying them, had left off. Fossey arrived at the site in the Virunga Mountains in Rwanda in January 1967. As Fossey discovered, mountain gorillas are gentle and family-oriented. She mimicked their eating and resting behaviors. This led to her easy acceptance by the gorilla group. Fossey named her favorite gorilla Digit. He was a young male. Fossey and Digit would often sit side by side while Digit ate the foliage and Fossey mimicked the behavior. While Fossey and the gorillas were friends, she had more problems with humans in the area. Poaching gorillas was a fairly easy way to obtain a lot of money. Fossey fought back against the poachers, who took out their anger at her by killing Digit in 1977. Fossey was heartbroken. She had Digit buried at the research center. Despite Digit's death, Fossey continued to fight the poachers while also continuing her research on mountain gorilla behavior. The struggle between the poachers and Fossey came to a dramatic climax in 1985 when Fossey was murdered. Diane Fossey was buried alongside Digit and other gorillas in a burial ground at the Karasoke Research Center. The Karasoke Research Center, founded by Fossey, continues research and conservation efforts for mountain gorillas. Leakey found the last of the Trimates in Los Angeles in 1969. Birute Galdikas, a student at UCLA, approached Leakey after a talk he gave to tell him that she wanted to study orangutans. Leakey had been looking for someone to do just that, so after interviewing Galdikas, he found the funding for her to set up a research station among the orangutans of Borneo. Galdikas began her research in 1971, and it continues to this day at Camp Leakey in the Tanjung Puting National Park. Dr. Galdikas is also a professor at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. In 1995, Dr. Galdikas published Reflections of Eden, a memoir of her life with the orangutans. I was able to attend one of her book signings that year and asked her whether she thought the Sumatran and Bornean orangutans were different species. This was a hot topic at the time, as a young adult male orangutan in a U.S. zoo had just been sterilized. The zoo had decided that he should not exist, as one parent was Bornean and the other Sumatran. I felt this action violated the biological species concept, which states that if the offspring of parents from different groups is viable, could live a healthy life, and could have offspring of its own, then the parents, no matter how different they might appear, were members of the same species. Dr. Galdikas agreed with me that Sumatran and Bornean orangutans were members of the same species. She was horrified at what had been done to that young male by the zoo personnel. Dr. Galdikas found that although adult orangutans live solitary lives in the wild, they can also be quite sociable. The orangutan females enjoy doing many of the same activities that they see humans do, such as washing clothing and paddling canoes. Louis Leakey found exactly the right women to study each of the non-human great apes. The research studies begun by Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, and Birute Galdikas continue to this day. These women and their research changed our understanding of not only our great ape relatives, but of ourselves. All praise to the Trimates, the Primate Triumvirate. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to my channel.